and we believe it can be enforced, and we believe it should be law, that children who are operating under a learner's permit, provisional operating permit, should be prohibited from using interactive wireless communication devices. My amendment would strike all references to that language in LB 415 if adopted. It retains Senator Harms's proposal that the permit provisions are still secondary offense because there are other issues that were adopted in the bill in addition to the cell phone provisions. Those would remain as secondary offenses. There were other issues that were offered by the Transportation Committee dealing with the timeline when you turn 16 years of age and adding some additional time of 3 months. Those would be retained. This simply puts the debate squarely on the cell phones. One of the things that I think is problematic with this language is that I don't believe that there is a reasonable expectation that it will be enforced. Now, in the course of other activities, it may be able to be enforced, but let me share with you a quote that I found by Albert Einstein. Nothing is more destructive of respect for the government and the law of the land than passing laws which cannot be enforced. They cannot be enforced. They can be enforced in limited areas, and Senator Harms is going to make strong cases as to why this should be the public policy of the state. The reality is that there is no expectation, or there is little expectation, that this will actually be effective in limiting it, but what it will do is it will give a standard. Senator Lathrop mentioned this in the debate on 415 on General File. It will give us a standard that this is not the law and you shouldn't do it. Similar to seatbelts. You don't have to wear a seatbelt in the state of Nebraska, but if you get caught, we're going to give you a ticket if we can prove that you weren't wearing it. There is that expectation of enforcement. I'm concerned that it's not realistic for it to actually happen. I think Senator Chambers' concerns on the adults in our society and the penalties that are not placed on them is a valid concern. Candidly, and I'll be completely upfront with you, I would oppose that as well. I would oppose that restriction. I think Senator Wallman's points, while they may be lighthearted, are also on point. In fact, in the last weekend when I was back in the district, I had 5 town hall meetings and I went to 4 schools. And obviously, if you ask them whether or not they would like this law to pass with a restriction on cell phones, they're going to say no. Senator Avery's son has shared that with him, and my response to Senator Avery is, well, regardless of what the law is, you're still his parent. You can still tell him no. I'm concerned that as we continue down this path of placing things in the law that are common sense expectations that candidly can't be enforced as a primary offense and become a secondary offense, that what we're doing is saying, well, we're not responsible on our own. We need this to be in law for justification. If it's not enforceable, it doesn't matter what's in the law. And that is my fundamental concern. So I see there are lights on. I see Senator Harms is standing ready, and as Senator Chambers pointed out, he didn't want to get in harm's way. The only way that this would have been a friendly amendment had I gotten Senator Friend to offer it. So I am standing in harm's way. It may not be the first nor the last, but I think this is a fundamental question that we have to decide. I think the questions are, can we expect enforcement? Will it accomplish the goal? If we are going to expect enforcement on those young people, why don't we expect enforcement on the rest of society? I think those are fundamental questions. And to the extent that we believe we can pick on the younger people, or that we can set a standard for them because they may not know any better, again, it comes back to the fact that there are other provisions that should address that. It's called education. Maybe it's called parenting. But I have fundamental concerns. Madam President, how much time do I have?
5 minutes.
I would yield my remainder to Senator Harms.
Thank you, Senator Harms.
Madam Chair and colleagues, thank you very much. I do oppose this very strongly. The issue really is about saving teens' lives. And how can you argue the fact, when you see the data, that we're not saving teens' lives? Let's just face it, teens at that age do not have, quite frankly, the ability to handle these multi-purpose kinds of things they're involved in driving. We're talking about teens that are in the process of learning how to drive, we're not talking about adults. As adults, we ought to know better. We're talking about teens that are learning how to drive, and we expect them not to pick up the cell phone and use it. They're going to use it. They use it now. My granddaughter uses it all the time at 14. They're going to use it. And I think you have to set the standard that says this is dangerous. We have to set the standard that says this is wrong, and we want you to follow these laws. You know, and as an adult, you ought to have the right, if you want to use that cell phone. You're old enough to determine whether you can use it or not. You have enough experience on the road. You've driven at nights. You've driven through snowstorms. A teen cannot do it.
I guess I know why Senator Chambers didn't want to be in harm's way. But I listened closely to what Senator Harms said, and I believe firmly that his zeal for this proposal is driving some of those comments that may not be taken literally. Teens don't have the ability to know better. Well, teens know what the MIP laws are, but we still have a problem. And why do we have a problem? Because of enforcement. Why do we have in law that if you're an MIP, you can be put in jail? Because in Kearney, the existing law wasn't able to be enforced, and the enforcement tools that we gave them weren't sufficient enough to curb the activities in that community. So it was in the law. It still is in the law. We've had to come back and fix it with minor consumptions and other things. It's not a direct analogy, but it's a point to the laws that we pass on young people. They know what the law is. They absolutely do. So do adults. But if the argument is that experience is important, I don't see that in this bill. Senator Copeland points out that younger people in rural Nebraska start driving at an earlier age. They do. I was 6. I probably have more experience driving than some of the people my age, but we're all adults. And we're going to paint a broad brush that all adults are competent and all kids aren't. Which one is it? And if we need to do everything that we can to protect these kids, we need to pass a law that says kids under the age of 18 can't drive at all. It would save all 35 of those kids. We're not going to do that because there's a reasonable expectation of society for certain opportunities, and with certain opportunities comes responsibility. I'm all for that. I absolutely am. Senator Harms, if I believe that this could be enforced, and if I believe that it would be effective, I would probably have a difference of opinion on putting it in this bill. I'll share another quote with you. Not that I've had a lot of spare times, but I found a few areas that I think apply to the debate both here and in other laws that we're debating. The best government is that which teaches us to govern ourselves. My good friend Senator Avery helped me with the pronunciation. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Of course, he had some other wild ideas about supremacy and different things of right and wrong regardless of the law, but we're going to constrain his comments here. The best government is that which teaches us to govern ourselves. If that's true, this is not the best government because we're not teaching people to govern themselves. We're using the law to govern themselves. Senator Harms' granddaughter is 14 years old, if I heard him correctly. He's carrying this bill. That's a great opportunity for that discussion. As a grandparent, as a parent, I'm all for that. But that enforcement principle is real. My concern is that we're building an unrealistic expectation that the law will be enforced. And maybe it's only a disagreement between Senator Harms and myself. And if it is, I apologize to the body. And if it is, it'll be done here shortly. Senator Harms will have his chance to further beat up on me. I don't have my light on. I have my chance to close. We'll see where we end up. But I believe we should have a reasonable expectation that the law can be enforced and that its enforcement provisions will be effective in accomplishing the goal. I'm not there.
1 minute.
I think I'll reserve. Thank you, Madam President.
Actually, it can be enforced. And the very fact is that if you have a cell phone and you are in an accident, it's very easy for us to check to see if that cell phone was actually used in this accident, because they can tell whether you've been on your cell phone and the time you're on the cell phone by simply asking law enforcement, by simply pursuing that particular issue. So, Senator Erdman, and there is a way to enforce it, and in some cases it has been enforced across the country. That's how we've gotten some of this data and some of the statistics, because law enforcement has done that. And the fact that you have brought up on several occasions in your conversation that we have to be able to govern ourselves, well, that's a great concept, but it's very difficult to do it without laws. And that's the heart of democracy. It's the heart of our freedom, quite frankly, is having laws that governs us, that sets the stage, sets the standards that we expect you to follow, myself, and teenagers, and the rest of the country. So that's what, to me, this is about. I think that what I'm trying to do is to save teens' lives. What I'm trying to do is to make sure that teens understand that this is dangerous, and that many kids who are teenagers who are very young are not really emotionally prepared to address the issue of an automobile, a car, and piling in with a number of other teens in their automobile. They cannot handle it. Senator Erdman brought up is its parental responsibility. You know what? I wish that was true, because so many parents in this country pay no attention to their kids. That's the tragedy here. If what Senator Erdman said, and I wish that it was true, that parents would step up and take an interest in their kids and talk to them about what they think is appropriate in that automobile. The family circle is not what it used to be, not as when I grew up. And I wish families were that way. I wish they would take an interest in their children and would actually spend time with them. And there are other issues that you can correct this with that tells what you expect. You can actually enter into a contract with your own son and your own daughter and your own teenager. And I've looked at some of those that simply show what you expect of them as a teenager and that automobile and what happens to you if you break those laws. And here are the penalties that you have. There are ways that you can do this. There are ways that we can address the issue, but you've got to have family concern. And I'm here to tell you, in the majority of this country, and in Nebraska, we don't have that. That circle has broken down. So because it's broken down, and because a teen cannot handle these kinds of issues, we need to set the standard that says, this is what we expect from you, this is where we're going to go, and this is why we want to be there. Because quite frankly, as parents, many parents, they're not parenting. And I hate to say that, but it's true. And I hate to have this to come into the discussion about this should allow us to be a parent. I'd love to have you be a parent if you just do it. Many people are not doing it.
Senator Erdman, would you yield?
I would.
Senator Erdman, do you understand the current provisional operational permit law, right?
As it's been explained to me, Senator Harms, I was actually just barely older than that provision when it was applied into law.
But as you study that, do you understand it?
I do. It's a graduated system.
Thank you. Is that law enforceable? That portion of the law, is that enforceable?
I think it's enforceable in the conduct of other activities, as you are now stating the law is under your amendment. I believe it's enforceable as a secondary offense currently in application, and I believe your amendment reflects that in reality.
So what's the difference, Senator?
What is the difference between the primary and secondary enforcement, or what is the difference between the provisional permit and the cell phone?
What I'm saying to you, what is the difference with 415 and the rest of that bill and the cell phones? What is the difference there?
I think they're similar, Senator Harms, and candidly, you and I can disagree as whether it needs to be in the law. That's where the fundamental disagreement is. Candidly, I take exception with your comment that I have no interest in saving teens' lives. You made that comment. I take offense to that, because that is not my intent here. But I think you have a strong point, and I hope you continue to argue it. I think you can make the argument and convince the legislature. My concern fundamentally comes back to the role of law. Senator Fulton, Senator Lathrop, and others have made a strong point that it is a tool, but my concern is that it becomes the only tool. That's one of my concerns. But, Senator Harms, you're carrying the day in the argument, and I applaud you at this point. I have some other comments later, but it is your time.
Thank you, Madam President.
Members of the legislature, the longer I'm here, the older I get. Well, if you want to clap about something, my birthday's on Saturday, so you can clap about that, but that's not why I brought that up. Those of you that have made valid points about being a parent, point well taken. I will not return the favor on the mic. Senator Chambers used the analogy of, or used the definition of pornography that the Supreme Court has given. When one of the justices said when they see it, they'll know what it is, but couldn't define it. He used that to make an analogy or a reference to what parenting skills are. I may have fit, but probably not a good analogy there. But it's somewhat true. When you see good parenting, you know it. And if you're a good parent and you see how your kids have been raised and the things that they've done, you know that as well. In the same sense, when you see a good law, you know it as well. You know that it accomplishes a goal. If you fundamentally agree with Senator Harms that you need more government to accomplish it, I can't argue out of that position. It's a philosophical disagreement about the role of government and where that line should be drawn. I cannot argue with you about that. It's my understanding that Senator Aguilar has never broken his arm. But I bet if you asked Senator Aguilar if that hurt, he'd probably tell you yes. And how does he know that? Doesn't hurt, Senator Aguilar? Senator Chambers will be down shortly. You don't have to break your arm to know that it hurts. I've never seen the wind. I've seen the effects of the wind. But I can see the implications of it. Just because I'm a young Nebraskan, and in great respect to the comments from Senator Chambers, doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm talking about. I remember standing on the floor of this legislature when one of my former colleagues stood up and said, "I hope that your mom is videotaping your rewrite of the state budget." I took offense to that. But if you want to vote against this amendment, fire away. Vote against it because you think it's the wrong public policy. But I think there's a lot to be learned this morning. We do have young people in the state of Nebraska that deserve more credit than they're receiving. I think that's a fundamental statement. There are also young people in this state that need more accountability than they're receiving. But one of the things that I tell young people when I visit with them, and I did it last week and I did it the time before when I was home visiting with students, is I tell them, don't let others look down on you because you are young. The fundamental disagreement here is whether or not young people have the ability to comprehend the circumstances that they're in. I think they do. I candidly do. Senator Harms and others think that the law will help them to understand better. I'm not convinced that simply having the law enables their comprehension any more than having people come beside them and explain to them why. So if you would like to support Senator Harms today for that reason, fine. Candidly, if this amendment gets adopted, I believe he has a couple components out of a 6-component bill that would be left. If you don't think that's fair to Senator Harms, that's fair enough to vote against it. If you like the idea of prohibiting cell phones in the circumstances he's outlined, vote against my amendment. I have a philosophical disagreement about the role of law in this area. I do think that the law in its inherent drafting is a deterrent. There are other distractions in the car that are not addressed here. That's no reason to vote for my amendment. But if we're serious about addressing all of the distractions, we should look at that. In fact, there's probably existing law that would address this issue, even if my amendment is adopted. Section 60-6212 is careless driving. It deals with distracted driving. So I'll leave you with this, and I firmly believe this. I think government should be effective and successful when it chooses to endeavor or to go into an area. But I believe that that government is best which governs least, and that it relies on the individuals to govern themselves first and foremost. We'll see where we're at.
Senator Karpyshek changing from yes to no. Senator Friend voting no. Senator Johnson voting yes. Senator Jansen voting yes. Senator Dubas voting yes. Senator Dirks voting yes.
Record, Mr. Clerk.
26 ayes, 6 nays on the advancement of LB 415.
The bill does advance.